Also call the subcommittee to order and recognize myself 5 minutes for the purpose of an opening statement. And Chair would note that today's hearing marks the Health Subcommittee's fourth hearing to consider reauthorization of vital user fee programs at the United States Food and Drug Administration. While the bulk of these programs were reauthorized last year through the FDA Reauthorization Act, our focus today on reauthorizing the Animal Drug User Fee Act and the Animal Generic Drug User Fee Act is equally important for the millions of American families and businesses that rely on the critical function of the Food and Drug Administration's Center for Veterinary Medicine. With this in mind, I expect us to reach a shared commitment to complete our work while reauthorizing these last set of user fees and get them to the House floor well in advance of the expiration date of September 30 of this year. We did so last year with the FDA user fee reauthorization, and there's no reason we cannot do so again here. This morning, we will have two panels of witnesses before the subcommittee. First, I do want to welcome Dr. Stephen Solomon, the Director for the Center of Veterinary Medicine at the Food and Drug Administration. Next, representatives from the Animal Health Institute, the Generic Animal Drug Alliance, and American Veterinary Medical Association will share their insights on the current state of the United States animal drug market and the significance of reauthorizing the Animal Drug User Fee Agreement and the Animal Generic Drug User Fee Agreement. Last month, the Committee on Energy and Commerce and the Senate Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee released the Animal Drug User Fee Reauthorization Act of 2018, a bipartisan discussion draft to renew the FDA's authority to collect user fees from the manufacturers of brand name and generic animal drugs for another 5 years. Among other things, these user fees help the Food and Drug Administration's Center for Veterinary Medicine in their timely review of animal drug applications, market surveillance of animal drug and safety and efficacy, and the quality assurance measures for animal food as well as food products derived from animals. From pet owners and veterinarians to farmers and animal food producers, updating these user fee agreements is essential in ensuring that animal drugs are safe and effective for farm animals and our pets while keeping our food supply safe. Reauthorizing these agreements also includes the new commitment between the FDA and industry on performance goals and procedures. This will be the fourth authorization for the Animal Drug User Fee Agreement since its launch in 2004. And we've seen it reviewed several times. Under the proposed agreement, funding for the program will increase by approximately $6 million annually. All submissions must be electronic. The Center for Veterinary Medicine is required to begin implementation of the US-EU Good Manufacturing Practice Mutual Recognition Agreement for inspections of pharmaceutical manufacturing facilities, and review time for drug combinations for use in feed is shortened to 60 days if no additional data is required. The Animal Generic Drug User Fee Agreement is going through its third authorization since 2008. The Center for Veterinary Medicine has met or exceeded nearly all of the performance goals in each 5-year authorization. In addition to increasing funding by approximately $10 million annually, the proposed agreement would shorten the review time for abbreviated new animal drug applications to 60 days and require all approved drugs to include these applications on the labeling. Finally, I would like to commend our fellow Health Subcommittee member, Representative Mark Mullen from Oklahoma, for championing the House Animal Drug User Fee Agreement and Animal Generic Drug User Fee Agreement reauthorizations. Thank you for your hard work on this important measure. I again want to welcome all of our witnesses for being here and look forward to your testimony. And I'll yield to Ms. Blackburn of Tennessee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And to our witnesses on each panel, thank you so much for being here. And I'm so grateful for the Chairman's leadership and the fact that we're approaching this in a bipartisan, bicameral manner. We know that what you do is important. We are pleased to see the amount of progress that is made in animal drugs, whether they're for our pets or for livestock that are in the food supply chain. We are wanting to focus and get some attention on the innovation side and how we speed the approval process. So we will look forward to addressing those issues with you today. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Chair thanks the gentlelady. As the chair recognizes the gentleman from North Carolina as the substitute ranking member of the subcommittee, and you're recognized for 5 minutes for the purpose of an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll take it any way I can get it this morning. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, to the Vice Chair, Ms. Blackburn. Thank you so very much for your opening comments. You're right, I am standing in for the ranking member this morning, Jean Green, who will be here momentarily, I am told. Thank you to the Director for your willingness to come forward and to share your testimony with us today. And this hearing, Mr. Chairman, is so very important, and so I associate my comments with the gentlelady from Tennessee that this is bipartisan, bicameral, and these are two pieces of legislation that we must move and do it very quickly. The Animal Drug User Fee Act is very important. The Animal Generic Drug User Fee Act is very important to all of us on this committee. These user fee agreements are important to millions of Americans, including those in my home state of North Carolina who live with companion animals every day. They are also important to the agriculture community. We have many stakeholders in this legislation. Some of you may not be aware that North Carolina, my state, is the second largest pork producer, the second largest turkey producer, and the third largest poultry producer in the entire country. Our agricultural community and family farms are essential to feeding our nation, and they depend on medicines to keep their animals very healthy. So, Mr. Chairman, I support reauthorization of these programs. I look forward to hearing about the innovation that's taking place in the animal drugs and how we can support the health of animals and human beings as well. Thank you for the time. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair thanks the gentleman. Chair would now like to recognize the gentleman from Oregon, Chairman of the full committee, Mr. Walden. 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for holding this hearing, and good morning, everyone. We look forward to yet another UFA hearing. We have a history of producing bipartisan user fee reauthorizations, and most recently is last year, and so I look forward to continuing in those efforts with this one. Whether it be livestock or house pets, the owners of these animals rely on Food and Drug Administration to ensure the availability of safe and effective medical products to keep their animals healthy. Through the Center for Veterinary Medicine, FDA evaluates new drugs to determine if the safety and efficacy of those treatments work for their stated use. In the case of livestock, CVM must also ensure the drug will not impact the food supply and not harm the environment or the health of the livestock producer who administers it. But the hard work of developing and manufacturing these drugs is done by the animal drug industry, and these companies face unique challenges that need to be considered, including R&D processes that involve developing and manufacturing drugs for different species of animals with different physiologies. So given the success of the human drug user fee programs and expediting approval of treatments by bolstering resources for the agency, the FDA and the animal drug industry came together to propose the animal drug user fee programs. These programs have succeeded in dramatically reducing review times by providing the FDA with much needed additional resources. So it is a win-win scenario where everyone benefits, including farmers, pet owners, and veterinarians. Today we're considering the reauthorization of those programs, the Animal Drug User Fee Act and the Animal Generic Drug User Fee Act, both of which will expire at the end of the fiscal year. So it's critical that these programs are passed and signed into law well before the end of September. Before each reauthorization as set forward in statute, FDA meets with the animal drug industry to reevaluate specific goals for review timelines, solicits comments from stakeholders and members of the public to consider additional enhancements. Then the final agreement is delivered to Congress for the program to be reauthorized. So for this cycle, that process began in May of 2016. And after numerous public meetings, the final negotiated recommendations were sent to Congress in January of this year. This year's agreements include increased collections from industry as well as more aggressive performance goals for the FDA. They also include several process improvements and other enhancements. And we look forward to hearing more about these agreements from our witnesses today. Encouraging innovation is a top priority of this committee, and we want to take this opportunity to examine the animal drug approval process to ensure the incentives are in place to encourage innovative treatments to be developed and for generic animal drugs to be made available. And we don't often think of the FDA when it comes to animal drugs, sadly, but these programs are critical, and they're important to pet owners in America and our farmers and ranchers, and rely on to produce food. And so we appreciate our witness today. We're actually going to get the wisdom of Solomon today, apparently. So we do appreciate that. And with that, I would yield the remainder of my time to Mr. Mullen, I believe, who is seeking time, been a real leader on this effort. So, Mark, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank you and Chairman Burgess for holding this hearing. I'm proud to be the sponsor of the legislation to reauthorize the Animal Drug User-Fee Act and its generic version. ADUFA and AGDUFA will reauthorize user fee agreements between the FDA and the animal drug industry to help speed the approval of new and generic drugs for farmers, ranchers, families, and veterinarians so they can keep their animals and pets safe and healthy. In the last reauthorization, the FDA committed to working with industry to complete recommendations for expanding conditional approval. I want to reaffirm my commitment to working with the FDA and the industry to come to a consensus as early as possible so we can continue to drive innovation. Thank you to our witnesses for being here today. I look forward to hearing your testimony regarding the importance of a clean reauthorization for our farming and ranching communities, and I yield back. Thank you.
Chair thanks the gentleman. Gentleman yields back. Chair recognizes the gentleman from New Jersey, ranking member of the full committee, Mr. Pallone. 5 minutes for an opening statement, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Today we'll be examining the FDA's Animal Drug User Fee Program and the Animal Generic Drug User Fee Program. And these critical user fee agreements have helped to accelerate the development of animal drugs, reduce application review times at FDA, and create a more predictable and streamlined process for getting animal drugs to market to help improve the health of our pets and food-producing animals. Last month, this committee, along with the Help Committee in the Senate, released a bipartisan discussion draft that reauthorizes FDA's authority to collect user fees from the animal drug and generic animal drug industries for an additional 5 years, as the current authorization for these programs will expire on September 30th. The discussion draft reflects bipartisan agreement and recommendations negotiated between FDA and the animal drug industry, with input from farmers and ranchers, veterinarians, food and feed producers, and other public health stakeholders. And these agreements are critically important to pet owners, veterinarians, and farmers, so they have access to safe, effective, and affordable medications for their animals. And we want our pets to have the best care possible, and we must ensure that we keep our food supply safe. The Animal Drug User Fee Program furthers both of these goals. I expect we'll hear also testimony today on FDA's work to address antimicrobial resistance from the use of antimicrobials in food-producing animals. I'm very interested in what the Center for Veterinary Medicine is doing to ensure the continued effectiveness of antibiotics and how we can protect both animals and humans from the growing threat of antimicrobial resistance. And I look forward to helping to move these agreements through Congress in a timely fashion so the Center for Veterinary Medicine at FDA can continue its important work. I don't think anyone else wants my time, and if they don't, I will yield back. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Chair thanks the gentleman. Gentleman yields back. This concludes member opening statements. The chair would remind members, pursuant to committee rules, all members' opening statements will be made part of the record. And again, we want to thank all of our witnesses for being here today and taking the time to testify before the subcommittee. Each witness will have an opportunity to give an opening statement, followed by questions from members. Our first panel today is Dr. Stephen Solomon, the Director of the Center for Veterinary Medicine, the United States Food and Drug Administration. We certainly appreciate you being here this morning, Dr. Solomon. You are now recognized for 5 minutes to give a summary of your opening statement, please.
All right. Good morning, Chairman Burgess, the acting ranking member, Chairman Walden, and the ranking member, Pallone. I am Dr. Steve Solomon, Director for the Center for Veterinary Medicine at the Food and Drug Administration. I thank you for the opportunity to discuss FDA's proposals for the reauthorization of the Animal Drug User Fee Act and the Animal Generic Drug User Fee Act. I recently returned to CVM as the Director after working extensively in other roles in FDA. This is a very good time to be at CVM for a number of reasons, including the fact that we're seeing the development of significant and innovative new animal products. New animal drugs offer the promise of longer and healthier life for our pets and other companion animals. For example, FDA has approved new oncology treatments for dogs targeting canine-specific tumors. the drugs represent a significant advance for veterinary medicine, which traditionally relies on human oncology treatments. In recent years, FDA has approved innovative therapy options that target bone changes to treat a common cause of performance-ending lameness in horses. New stem cell therapies offer great promise for future veterinary treatments and cures. Meanwhile, approval of the first generic version of a vital heartworm treatment has alleviated a shortage of this critically important treatment for dogs and provides an alternative to pet owners. FDA plays a vital role in animal agriculture by reviewing the safety and efficacy of new animal drugs for food-producing animals such as cattle, pigs, and chickens. For food-producing animals, we also evaluate whether products derived from treated animals are safe for human consumption. Awareness of the public health challenge created by antimicrobial resistance has led to important changes in animal agriculture. For example, as an alternative to antimicrobials, FDA approved a new treatment to prevent mastitis in dairy cows. At the same time, animal welfare awareness has grown, and we've approved the first drug to reduce pain in food-producing animals. FDA considers timely review of new animal drug safety and effectiveness to be central to the agency's mission to protect and promote human and animal health. ADUFA and AGDUFA are highly successful programs that enhance the availability of approved products for food-producing and companion animals. Before their enactment, FDA's CVM had a large backlog of overdue submissions, and sponsors had to wait on average 500 to 700 days for drug review. However, thanks to ADUFA and AGDUFA user fees, CVM eliminated the backlog in application and has dramatically reduced review times. Both programs enable FDA to maintain an outstanding scientific and technical workforce, improve timely communication with drug sponsors, and achieve other efficiencies in the drug approval process while maintaining scientific standards for drug safety and efficacy. Without reauthorization, however, both programs will sunset on October 1st, 2018. Timely reauthorization is needed to assure FDA's ability to deliver continued high levels of performance and ensure there are no disruptions to these important programs. The ADUFA 4 proposal builds on the success of prior ADUFA achievements and proposes changes to current performance goals to enhance review. In it, FDA agrees to maintain current performance goals for most applications and submissions and to add 4 new performance goals to enhance the exchange of scientific information. FDA would slash the time frame for reviewing categorical exclusion and Animal Drug Availability Act combination medicated feed requests by 2/3. We also established new goals for pre-submission conferences and tissue residue method demonstrations. ADUFA 4 also includes an FDA commitment to work on the implementation of the U.S.-European Union Good Manufacturing Practice Inspection Mutual Recognition Agreement for animal drug facilities. The AGDUFA 3 agreement includes significant additional financial commitments from the animal generic drug industry that reflect its growth. These resources will help significantly decrease review time for multiple generic submissions and provide greater review predictability. Both the ADUFA and AGDUFA recommendations require 100% electronic submission starting next year to facilitate efficient review. Additionally, both programs include financial recommendations to bolster the program's stability. The ADUFA 4 and AGDUFA 3 agreements, produced with considerable input from FDA, industry, and other important stakeholders, build on the achievements of these highly successful programs. They will ensure FDA has the resources needed to conduct timely reviews and assist drug sponsors in fostering innovation, enhancing access to safe and effective therapies for food-producing and companion animals. FDA looks forward to working with the committee to achieve a timely reauthorization of these important human and animal health programs. Thank you for the opportunity to discuss the ADUFA and AGDUFA program. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Chair, thanks, gentlemen, and do want to thank you for taking time to give us testimony this morning. We will move into the portion of the hearing where members' questions are heard. I'll begin by recognizing myself for 5 minutes. And Dr. Solomon, you referenced the implementation of the U.S.-European Union Good Manufacturing Process inspection. What are some of the particular challenges that you face with that? Has that been more straightforward or more difficult than you would have anticipated?
So thank you for that question. We're still in the early stages of doing that. The EU GMP inspection mutual recognition agreement started on the human side, and it then will move over to the veterinary side later on. So on the human side, it's been making good progress. Once again, lots of countries in the EU, they need to be assessed. What we've discovered is that not all the authorities in the EU have the same authorities on the human side as they do on the animal drug side. So as we progress through it and looking at the animal drug side, we're going to utilize the information that the human side has collected as part of their agreement. But as we move into it, we're going to need to look at the countries and conduct assessments of them that have separate authorities in the EU countries for the animal side.
So there is an increase in funding in the proposed legislation that Mr. Mullen has given us. How do you propose that the Food and Drug Administration is going to utilize the additional resources? And perhaps how is that going to help us improve the review process?
So we're going to be hiring additional reviewers on both sides to meet the new performance commitments. There'll be approximately 20 new reviewers in different disciplines on the animal drug user fee side, and around 30 new people hired on the generic drug user fee side. And some of those resources will be able to be used for implementation of the EU agreement, where we need to go over to the EU and conduct assessments of the other countries' regulatory authorities and oversight over GMP of animal facilities.
Just for a point of reference, how large is the workforce currently?
So the current user fees represent around 30% of the animal drug review, 35% of the staff on the animal drug review side, and around 60% on the generic drug user fee side. So those are covered by user fees.
Okay. So there are more aggressive approval goals that are laid out in this reauthorization. You've already alluded to it somewhat, but again, could you just briefly delineate the steps the FDA will be taking to meet these goals?
Certainly. So we've already been doing planning in anticipation of getting this. Part of the process is going to be earlier communication. We have a phase review process in CVM where we really interact with the industry very early in the process, where they're still in the developmental stage process. We want to enhance that early communication. Before, while they're developing, the industry's developing a drug, let's meet with them early and make sure we understand what the data requirements, what type of clinical studies are going to need to be done so that we can very quickly decide what those are. We're also reducing timeframes for some unique aspects. The categorical exclusion is some of our environmental findings. On the generic drug side, we're dramatically reducing the timeframes to be able to get generic animal drugs to the market sooner.
So on the issue of the electronic submissions that I believe are going to be required in this reauthorization, can you, I mean, obviously there are going to be benefits to electronic submission. Would you care to share those with us?
Thank you. So electronic submission is a big step in trying to do it. When I first started at CVM 28 years ago, there used to be trucks backing up with these volumes and volumes of paper that needed to be reviewed. Trying to then take those and give them to the different disciplines was quite a challenge. The electronic review process makes the review much more efficient. Everyone and all the different scientists have access to the data in a much more expedient way and makes it a much more efficient process of a review.
Well, again, I thank you for being here this morning. Thank you for your testimony and taking our questions. I'd now like to recognize Mr. Butterfield from North Carolina for your questions, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Solomon, thank you for your testimony today. Dr. Solomon, I've heard from some of my colleagues and some of my constituents about expanding the use of what is called conditional approval. And it's my understanding that the FDA believes that it needs legislation to provide authority to allow this conditional approval to be used for major uses in major species. Am I right or wrong about that?
You are correct. So Congress gave us statutory authority back in 2004 for use of conditional approval in minor species or minor use in major species. What that does is the applicants, sponsors still need to prove the safety, the environmental controls, the human food safety, but allows a 5-year time frame to demonstrate the efficacy of the product while it can be on the market. We've had discussions with industry that in order to help spur innovation, trying to get this applied to major species under certain conditions, the conditions being that it's got to be for serious illness or disease in major species that really have unmet veterinary medical needs or public health needs, and for studies that have difficulty in demonstrating efficacy. So things that we would envision would be more chronic disease conditions, things like congestive heart failure, chronic renal disease, osteoarthritis, things that would be difficult to do the efficacy studies because you need to measure things over time. We think conditional approval would be a welcome addition to try and get additional products on the market.
Can you describe the safety requirements that must be met for conditional approval?
So the safety requirements have to be met exactly the same as for any other approval. So there is no difference in the safety that needs to be demonstrated before marketing. The only difference on conditional approval is the time frame for efficacy requirements, which can be up to 5 years after the product starts marketing.
Would any of the drug companies that we deal with have an incentive to provide a drug under conditional approval that it does not believe to be effective?
So there's a requirement in the conditional approval that they need to submit status reports on an annual basis, at least as it's currently applied to minor use, minor species, on the progress they're making on the efficacy requirements. And then if they do not meet it, they need to come in at 5 years for the full standard for efficacy, which means substantial evidence of efficacy at the end of that 5 periods. If not, the way the MUMS Act works, and what we would hope in any future one, is that product is no longer allowed to be marketed. So it gives them time to do the efficacy studies for those challenging efficacy studies that are meeting unmet veterinary medical needs.
Dr. Sullivan, I appreciate the work that the FDA has done to expedite the process of approval for animal drugs, and I really appreciate your testimony earlier about how it was 28 years ago when the trucks would back up to your building. I can just envision that now. In your testimony, you mentioned that the agreement recommends that 100% of the applications be submitted electronically, and only 58% of applications were submitted in FY 2017 that way. Will the FDA provide any support to help with that transition to electronic applications, what I call 21st century technology?
Yes. So we recognize that on the Pioneer side, most of the submissions are coming in electronic. On the generic side, these are generally smaller companies, newer companies. We want to provide assistance to try and get there. And it also includes some IT enhancements in the funding to help CVM support making that transition over to, so we can get everyone to the 100% submission goal.
And are the sponsors ready to make that transition, or do they have some anxiety about it?
I think they're generally anxious to try and do it. I think they see the efficiencies in it, but I think it's a great question for the panel coming up.
All right. All right. Thank you. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields back. Chair thanks the gentleman. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Kentucky, the Vice Chairman of the committee, Mr. Guthrie.
Thank you very much. Actually, I can't let the chairman's comment of the wisdom of Solomon this morning go. I know you probably hear that all the time, and I apologize, but trying to be a little more disciplined myself, as Solomon talked about, and trying to read the Proverbs of the day, of the chapter of the month, to the 14th, today being the 14th Proverbs. And if you read Proverbs every day, there's always something you're going to face. So Proverbs 14:4 says, "Where there are no oxen, the manger is empty, but from the strength of an ox comes abundant harvest." So what we're doing here, it goes back to understanding we have to have a good agriculture, even back in the Bible times, and proclaimed by Solomon, which is the standard of wisdom. And some of the questions that they've already, I guess some of your testimony piqued all of our interest, because I'm going to kind of touch on them again, because I was going to ask that. But first, can you please explain ADUFA 4 performance goals, specifically centered around shortening the review time frame for combination medicated feed?
Sure. So this was an agreement that we worked on during the previous time frame. So there's a number of medicated feeds that combine various different drugs, usually for different type conditions. So there might be some combination that there might be a need for a antiparasitic drug for say, coccidia. At the same time, they may be treating a bacterial infection type area. So in the medicated feed area, we wanted to not subject each of them to a separate approval requirement when each drug had already gone through an approval combination. When we put these two combinations together, we need to make sure that they're not interfering with each other, the two drugs together. Putting drugs in the feed supply is often the most efficient way to get it into food-producing animals. So we worked with the industry to come up with a shortened time frame to evaluate these drugs when they combine them together in medicated feeds.
Okay, thanks. And the second question, I was going to talk about the electronic submission. And it was kind of asked, but at the very end, you said that'd be a good question for the next panel, why we haven't gotten a higher percentage from 58 to 100%. And we'll do that and ask them that. What kind of challenges are you seeing from, for some reason they're not, obviously, I don't know if it's all their issues for not getting the 100%, but what kind of challenges from your perspective do you think the next panel should be looking at to address?
So I think my understanding is this is mainly some of the newer companies. Often we have companies that are new on the generic side to this and just simply haven't developed the structure for all the electronic pieces. We give lots of guidance on what we expect in a submission, how to put it together, how to facilitate the electronic entry. We have a pathway for removing it. We're going to try and provide, help desk assistance for anyone that needs assistance in getting that electronic review. So we all benefit from getting the electronic review process, and we want to work with the industry to get to that objective.
Do you think 100% is attainable by 2019?
We will work closely with them to try and meet that goal.
That's a good answer. And Dr. Burgess talked a little bit about the U.S.-European Union good manufacturing practices for animal drug facilities. What is the time frame for this agreement? And I know you said they're doing the human and then the animal. Well, what's the time frame for the agreement, and when do you expect to see that?
So the way the agreement is drafted, the agreement got signed on the human side in March of 2017, and they're still going through the assessments. A number of the EU countries have already been reviewed and are now part of the agreement. In December, we met with the European Union to lay out our goals and objectives for trying to move it on the animal side. And we have an objective by making a determination by July of 2019 whether we're going to be successful in trying moving that agreement forward and the time frame for meeting that assessment so we can evaluate the GMP conditions on the animal side of the house.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, and that concludes my questions. I appreciate your testimony. I yield back.
Chair thanks the gentleman. Gentleman yields back. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Oregon. Dr. Schrader, 5 minutes for questions, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it. Welcome, Dr. Solomon.
Thank you.
Very impressive, the results you guys have gotten as a result of the previous ADUFA agreements. I mean, the performance measures speak for themselves, 95 to 100% success in all the different areas that most agencies would die to have that sort of track record at the end of the day. And you're stepping up and willing to reduce timelines and do some more work with little assistance from industry. And I guess the comment I'd make is that it's just great to see these public-private partnerships. I mean, that's ideally the way things are supposed to work. We're in this together. It's not one versus the other, but helping one another get the job done for humans and, in this case, for our animal friends. As a veterinarian, very interested in the conditional use approval process. Frankly, in the animal field, we're a smaller population, usually not quite as remunerative as it is with our human medical colleagues, and as a result, the conditional use process is critical for us to be able to access some of these medications in a more timely manner and make them available to our patients. And frankly, some of the work that's done on our patients benefits our human colleagues at the end of the day. So very interested in the potential expansion of the conditional use process. When you were before the HELP committee, you indicated that felt that at least for the minor species, minor use, it was working pretty well. But we're getting a little behind. The timeline was 2015, I think, at one point. And looking at the expansion of the scope, you alluded to it, I think, in your comments, both to the chair and to Mr. Butterfield. But when do you think we're going to be finishing this expansion and hopefully getting to full conditional use for the major species as well as the minor?
So thank you for your interest in our issues. So once again, it needs statutory language to expand it for the conditional approval in major species. Once again, this is not for all uses. This is for significant serious disease conditions, unmet veterinary or medical needs. We certainly could see this for certain zoonotic diseases that may arise where you need to get a drug out. You want to show that the product is safe, which needs to be shown beforehand, but some of the efficacy requirements may come later, but in critical public health issues, which I'm sure you recognize, it might be out there. So we met earlier this year with the drug industry. We shared the interest in moving this forward. Our staffs have been working really closely on this issue over the past month and a half. And if Congress is interested in the conditional approval, we would love the opportunity to provide some technical assistance on that issue.
Great. Like to see that move forward because there are unmet needs and there are some difficult processes. And either one of those, I think, would be a good justification for some of the changes in the conditional approval process. It'd be very helpful. Getting back to the minor uses, major species, and minor species piece, my understanding from the testimony has only been 4 really applications and only 1 been approved. Is there a problem in the process here, or do you need some more help from us?
So it is a little disappointing. We'd hope that we'd have that incentive would be more products out there. Of the 4 products, 1 was an aquaculture product that got approved. Clearly a needed area of resources. 2 of them demonstrate that some of the challenges. So 2 were cancer-causing drugs to fight cancer. 1 drug, simply the firm withdrew it because it was not demonstrating efficacy. They didn't have the right doses. So they determined, let me take this off the market, go do some more work, and come back. 1 just couldn't get the efficacy standard and therefore had to be withdrawn. And we have another one that's currently in the pipeline that looks promising.
You see, the incentives seem to be okay. It's just maybe companies getting used to the process or getting familiar with the opportunity.
Once again, firms that are looking for usually in the minor species are generally small firms. And while the economic incentives for major species are often challenged compared to the human side, it's even more challenging on the minor species side.
Okay. And then ADUFA 3 accelerated the process quite a little bit, replaced the end review amendment process and shorter second round reviews. Any problems with safety as a result of doing those things? Any problems crop up as a result of making the process more efficient?
No, I think safety is always of paramount concern. And once again, our process doesn't just stop with the approval process. We have post-marketing activities that monitor the safety of drugs. We have the largest adverse event database in the world. We work with other countries on harmonizing that data, and we use that data if we ever have to make adjustments to a product and work with industry to continue to ensure the safe use of animal drugs.
Very good. Thank you, and I yield back.
Chair thanks the gentleman. Gentleman yields back. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Indiana, Dr. Bouchon. 5 minutes for questions, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This year's ADUFA includes a new goal for tissue residue method validation. First, can you explain what this is in layman's terms, and then describe how this validation of tissue residue methods may have led to delays in the approval of new drugs in the past? And then could you walk us through how you plan to meet the new review goal of 120 days for this measure?
So thank you. So a tissue residue method is for a animal drug that's going to be used in food-producing animals. We need to develop a method, industry needs to develop a method, and then we need to do validation of the method to make sure that the levels and the determination of the safety in meat, milk, or eggs has been determined, and this is the method that would be used to evaluate that in the food supply once the product's on the market. We have an Office of Research as part of CVM that does this work. This is the first time we actually put a goal time period to be able to meet the objectives of developing the tissue residue method and validating that method. And because of the agreement, we're now able to hire additional resources and people that, research scientists that can work out in our Office of Research to be able to support the tissue residue method.
So protecting the public health and providing the best animal health and welfare can only be achieved through continued advancements in innovation. I hear of a need for more innovation in animal health due to the unmet medical needs. What are some of the ways the agency can spur innovation to meet some of these needs?
So we're doing a lot of different work to communicate with firms early and be able to get new products on the market. One of the ways is we do different surrogate endpoints. One example is there's a disease of Addison's disease, which is a low level of cortisol. Cortisol levels are hard to measure because they're a natural hormone in the body. So we've used surrogate endpoints to measure sodium and potassium ratios rather than looking at the endpoint. We use different clinical designs. So I talked earlier about use of drugs in food-producing animals. So you're trying to sit down with us, what's it going to demonstrate to show the target animal safety? What are we going to need for the clinical efficacy? Each drug is unique because, once again, we're using different approaches. Are we using different surrogate endpoints? Are we using data from human trials?
Well,
Are we using
my time's almost up, but is the patent protection similar for this development as it is, and then generics can come on board after 17 years or whatever it happens to be?
So I need to get back to you on the patent issues. We do have exclusivity issues where the drugs are either for 3 years or 5 years when a pioneer comes on before a generic product can come on the market.
So significantly reduced time compared to human drugs, yeah.
On the exclusive marketing, yes.
Very good. Well, thank you. It's very informative. I yield back.
Chair thanks the gentleman. Gentleman yields back. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Bilirakis, 5 minutes for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it. Dr. Solomon, would you briefly explain how ADUFA and AGDUFA improved FDA regulation as far as the public health is concerned, and how the most recent proposed changes will benefit FDA and public health?
So by getting new products, new animal drugs to the market, many of these drugs are very important for food-producing animals, which directly affects public health. When we get a new antimicrobial, for example, for use for treating a disease in a food-producing animals, we have the resources to try and do the human food safety aspect of that review. That review includes all the toxicology review, the residue review, which I talked about before with the tissue residue method, but it also looks at the microbial review process. Is this a product that could affect humans and is medically important in humans and therefore could cause antimicrobial resistance? So that's all part of the review process that directly affects public health.
Okay, very good. How has consolidation in the industry impacted the review process?
So on the pioneer side, there's been considerable consolidation that's taken place. From our perspective, they become more familiar with it, and therefore the submissions, or they understand better the products out there. It also has an effect that sometimes it reduces the number of applications. So when a company has had mergers and several drugs, they often look at their portfolio, and it may result in some products being withdrawn from the market.
Okay, what are the consequences of not reauthorizing these user-fee programs?
So I hope no one wants to go down that path because it's significant.
Tell us
Once again, we've achieved these timely review processes. It would create instability in the industry. We've become very predictable on the timeframes and the pathways for these products. It would be significant in terms of our staff. We have 115 staff that are currently employed using the user fees. Depending on the timing of when reauthorization would look, we would have to give notices. And it would make great challenges for our future staffing. People would not want to come to work for the Center for Veterinary Medicine, where we have outstanding scientists and reviewers, veterinarians that come on if there was uncertainty about this pathway.
Well, thank you. Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I'll yield back the balance of my time. Thank you.
Chair thanks the gentleman. Gentleman yields back. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Griffith. 5 minutes for questions, please.
Thank you very much. All right, so what can we do to help to bring some of these ideas that you talked about, the antimicrobials that are being used, and trying to make sure that we have drugs for the animals, but that they don't affect humans? What can we do to move that process along and make it a little quicker?
So we're working very closely on the antimicrobial resistance issue. It's a significant public health issue. We work on judicious use policies, both on the human side. My counterparts work on the human side. We work on the animal side of that issue. We work closely with industry to withdraw all the claims for use that was production uses for feed efficiency and growth promotion. Industry worked over the past 3 years. As of January of last year, all those were withdrawn. We continue to work at monitoring both sales of antimicrobials and monitoring through our National Antibiotic Resistance Monitoring System antibiotic usage. Our colleagues at the American Veterinary Medical Association have put out to the veterinary profession principles of good stewardship of antimicrobial use and principles about how to apply that and the definitions associated with that. Our American Association of Veterinary Medical Colleges has developed curriculum to be able to educate the new generation on what judicious use looks like. We continue to need to work both domestically and internationally on getting better data to monitor antimicrobial resistance over time.
All right, now I'm going to shift gears on you, and feel free to tell me that not my department, but I had some folks come to me recently, and I represent the part of Virginia that has Virginia Tech, where a lot of research is being done. And they were talking about genetically modified calves. And when they finish with their testing on, rearranging the genes in the calf, they have to kill the mother. I'm trying to figure out why. Do you have any help? Can you help me there? Because why would the mom be affected by a genetically modified calf when the calf is placed there out of a test tube, and it has nothing to do with her other than she's the vehicle in which the calf is being
So I don't think I can answer the question on the
That's
mother.
fair. I thought that might be the case.
But in a genetically modified animal, they do need to go to a review process to make sure these animals are safe, and if someone's going to eat them, that the modification makes it safe for people to eat.
And I recognize it's not necessarily your field, but it's something we might want to look at some point, Mr. Chairman, is that they get that with the genetically modified calf, and so when they finish their experiment, they understand they have to kill the calf, but I can't figure it out. Now, it's not my field, so maybe as a small country lawyer, there's some obvious answer. But if you could maybe see if you could find me the right person to answer that question, why does the mother have to be killed? Because, the mama is a valuable asset. And when you're doing research and you suddenly have to start killing off assets that I can't figure out, nor could this individual who brought this to me figure out why the mother also has to be killed. Calf, I get. You don't want to put that calf into the marketplace. And maybe you don't want to put mom in the marketplace, but you could use her again. She's able to have more than one. They're not able to do that right now. But I appreciate it.
We're happy to take a look into the issue.
And I appreciate that. And with that, Mr. Chairman, most of my questions having previously been asked, I yield back.
Chair thanks the gentleman. Gentleman yields back. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Shimkus. 5 minutes for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sorry I'm late. We're at another hearing. I'm sure you've heard that before. And I wish I would have been here for Kurt Schrader's question, since he's a veterinarian, and I would have loved to hear. Maybe I'll check his questions for the record. But we started going into this antimicrobial resistance discussion, and the only thing I wanted to raise was, I know you've all talked about the conditional approval authority extensively, which is good. How might you, in this antimicrobial resistance, can expand and improve your antimicrobial resistance provisions as we move to, I call it AGDUFA 3?
So I think there's opportunities if conditional approval for serious medical conditions that are treating public health issues, there's opportunities for alternatives to antibiotics to be potentially used under conditional approval. And I think we'd welcome those opportunities. We have approved a drug that's an alternative to antibiotics. It's given to dairy cows to try and prevent mastitis. It increases the number of neutrophils in the bone marrow to be able to fight infections. I think we're looking for other innovations that can be used as alternatives to antimicrobials, and I think conditional approval may be another incentive to try and get those products to the market.
Yeah, and I should have asked this question first as to set up the second one, but what are the barriers you have right now under current law on this debate?
So the conditional approval Congress approved for only minor use in major species or minor species. In order to use it in major species under the unique conditions that we've defined, it needs new statutory authority because it was, right now, efficacy needs to be demonstrated at the same time as target animal safety, human food safety, the environmental review process. The conditional approval allows all the human food safety, the other pieces, the technical sections to be reviewed, allows the product on the market, 5 years, industry can demonstrate the efficacy, comes back in and gets the full approval.
Do you agree with that, Schrader?
Yes, I do. I mean, he outlined the current process and stuff, but we do need to expand the conditional use opportunities for major species. I think
Good enough for me. You'll back my time. Thank you.
Chair thanks the gentleman. Gentleman yields back. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Oklahoma. Mr. Mullen, 5 minutes for questions, please.
Now, that is good timing. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Solomon, thank you so much for you taking the time to be with us. A couple of questions that I have. What is the timing? We've been talking a lot about conditional approvals. What's the timing on this? Do we know what we're looking at? How we can more predict in the industry level?
So once again, I think we've worked very hard with industry over the long period of time, but more expeditiously recently, to try and get a common understanding of conditional approval. I think there's a good understanding of the scope that we've described here about its use for challenging efficacy issues, serious medical conditions. So we'd be interested in, if Congress wants to take this one, we'd be welcome the opportunity to give some technical assistance to it. There may be some remaining issues that would need to be worked through either a guidance or a regulatory process, but getting the statutory authority while ADUFA, AGDUFA would be an opportunity.
Do you know what you would need from Congress? Because I'm committed to working with you, and the industry is wanting to work with you. We're wanting to see this move forward. I mean, because as we know, underneath the idea, which passed in 2004, we've only seen, 4 different drugs that's actually been able to come out of it. And I don't think that was the intent. Originally, the intent was to help incentivize the industry on coming up with new ways and new paths to be able to produce and enhance the treatment for the animals. So what would you need from Congress? How could I work with you? Because in all seriousness, I really want to see this go as far as what Congress, I think, first intended in 2004 for it to go to.
So once again, in 2004, it was for the minor species and the minor uses. We're now having discussions, can we expand that to major species under unique conditions? We would welcome the opportunity to work on technical assistance to try and
Who needs to be at the table on that?
The industry is clearly at the table.
Right.
American Veterinary Medical Association, a lot of people that are sitting here today.
So are we the ones missing at the table then? I mean, if you said you're welcome to work with Congress on this, I'm just looking for a path. How do we need to inject ourselves into this conversation without confusing it?
I think technical assistance for some language that I think has been floating around. Once again, this is a recent development. We recognize this. We recognize timeframes are challenging, but we welcome the opportunity to try and get this important piece added.
Well, we've worked with the industry some as far as looking for language that's needed. Have you had the time to look at it yet?
So we've had staff working very closely with the industry on that piece.
But you haven't got to look at it yet?
We would like the opportunity of sort of taking that language, if we get requested by Congress, and be able to provide formal agency review of that.
Okay. I guess that's where I'm confused too. Is it simply me saying I want you to look at it, or is there and I'm confused here, does it take actually legislation for us to give you?
I think it's only a request that if Congress is, which sounds, a lot of interest here in conditional approval, if you came to us, we'd be happy to provide technical assistance to get the formal agency position to try and have it in front of you to decide to include it in the ADUFA, AGDUFA.
Well, let me talk with the committee, so I'm not stepping in front of the chairman on this, and find out for sure where the committee wants. But I was under the understanding that's where we're wanting to move to. But I will get back to you personally, and then I look forward to working with you moving forward with it.
We welcome that opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'll yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair would observe that the gentleman might want to work with the primary author of the bill. Oh, that is the gentleman. So, yes. No, we will work with you, Mr.
I don't
Mullen.
want to overstep the committee because you're very gracious to me.
We will work with you, absolutely. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Green. 5 minutes for your questions, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I apologize for being late. Thank you, Dr. Solomon, for being here today. And as you explained in your testimony, over the last 2 years, FDA has been working to finalize recommendations for reauthorization of the animal drug user fees and has held negotiations with regulated animal drug and generic animal drug industries in order to reach an agreement on both financial and performance goals for the next 5 years. These recommendations are finalized and transmitted to Congress for consideration early this year. Dr. Solomon, you noted that the FDA is currently delivering predictably high levels of performance against the ADUFA and AGDUFA goal commitments for a timely review. Under ADUFA 4 and AGDUFA 3, do you believe this high level of performance will continue?
With the additional resources that have been negotiated and put forward, yes, we're committed to continue to meet the high levels of performance.
Is this why the performance recommendations for most of the submission types for Pioneer drugs remains consistent with the current goals?
That's correct. So once again, we've reduced timeframes for most of those submissions. We added 4 new areas this time, of particular importance to some of those commitments for early communication with the industry early in the development process.
Okay. For generic animal drug submissions, FDA's performance goal review times have been shortened. Can you explain how the FDA plans to meet those new timeframes?
So there was a significant new resources associated with the generic drug. The industry really wanted to be able to get the generic drugs to the market sooner, and so they committed additional resources. We plan on hiring the scientific support staff to be able to conduct those reviews. There's been a tremendous increase in generic drug submissions. Over the past couple of years, the workload has increased tremendously. In fact, we had over a 50% increase in the last year on generic drug submissions.
Okay. Can you explain how the financial recommendations in the AGDUFA 3 negotiated agreement have changed from AGDUFA 2? Additionally, can you explain the rationale for those changes? Was it mainly just an increased funding?
So there's increased funding. We also made the funds more readily available. So one of the conditions is, historically, there used to be a process where if there's excess collections of funds, you'd have to wait to the last year of the agreement in order to be able to use them. We negotiated with industry. They would like, and we would like to be able to use those funds earlier. There were some changes in the inflation index that took place to make it a variable inflation index. And there was changing the base years that we were using for the negotiation. So all agreed upon.
Okay. Are there any other performance and financial recommendations from the new proposal that should be highlighted?
The tremendous changes on the generic drug side dramatically reduce the timeframes associated with those. So I think the industry and FDA would be very excited about meeting those new timeframes because there's significant reductions.
Okay. Well, thank you, Dr. Solomon. These performance and financial goals are critical aspects to the ADUFA and AGDUFA programs and will chart the course for the next 5 years. I'm pleased that the FDA and the animal health industries have reached agreement and look forward to the swift reauthorization of these important programs. And Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Chair thanks the gentleman. Chair recognizes the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Hudson. 5 minutes for your questions, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Dr. Solomon, for your time today. In my home state of North Carolina, agriculture is the #1 industry. Poultry is the #1 sector, making up 40% of our state's total farm income. All told, it's about $4 billion a year, or 10% of our total state product. One issue that pops up continually for our chicken and turkey farmers is blackhead disease. This highly transmittable disease can wipe out an entire turkey flock in weeks, disrupts breeding cycles for chickens, causes millions of dollars in damage to my farmers back home. This disease occurs sporadically but has a high impact every time it strikes a farmer's flock. Unfortunately, no medication exists at this moment to treat or cure this disease, meaning that if your flock is hit, it's guaranteed to hurt. Because this disease requires a spontaneous biological event to occur, it's almost impossible to create controlled trials to study the disease or the efficacy of the drug. One thing my colleagues Mark Wayne Mullen and Dr. Bouchon noted earlier, and I've been examining, is the conditional approval. It's gotten a lot of attention during this hearing. Pathway for major use, major species. Blackhead disease is just one disease of many where a conditional approval pathway would help drug makers give medications to farmers and pet owners that are currently unviable for the traditional approval pathway. So in your testimony, you note that the CVM is committed to continuing to explore conditional pathways. Do you agree that the conditional approval pathway for major use and major species would help bring innovative therapies that can treat diseases like blackhead disease to market?
I do. We've done a lot of work on blackhead. We recognize that's one of those unmet veterinary medical needs out there. We've asked for the industry and the turkey industry that suffers from this the most, that they may be eligible under our minor use, minor species, but we need data presented to try and do that. If they're unable to meet that, then this new conditional approval proposal would be a welcome. It's a challenging disease to treat because of many of the sporadic conditions, seasonal nature of it. It would be one that, demonstrating efficacy over a longer period of time could be a valuable tool in the arsenal.
Great. Well, I appreciate that. And my colleague, Mark Wayne Mullen, and others have I think, clearly established that we want to work with you on this. And, we welcome any feedback you have on any requirements that make a conditional approval pathway feasible. What you need from us to move forward on this, and rather than continue to beat that dead horse, I would just ask, do we have your commitment that we'll move as quickly as we can together to find a way forward on this?
We are ready, willing, and able to sort of work with you on that issue.
Great. I appreciate that very much. Unrelated to conditional use, but just out of curiosity for me, off the top of your head, what's the longest amount of time that CVM has spent reviewing a single drug?
That's probably the genetically engineered salmon, which went on for a significant period of time for a lot of different reasons.
What do you think, just in general, the reasons for longer review cycles are?
So for that particular review, that was unique, the first genetically engineered animal for food-producing animals. You need to develop how are you going to evaluate the safety, the efficacy of something that's so new and novel. It was one also of great concern from an environmental area, which is part of our requirement. What's the potential for a genetically engineered animal to get loose, either get into the wild, even though they're sterile animals, poses lots of different challenges looking at our typical review process when something unique. Now that we've been through those processes, we've answered many of those questions.
Well, just in a more typical review process, what are some of the reasons that these sometimes take longer?
So data quality is an important issue for us. We constantly are working with the industry. The more higher quality the data, then we'd have to go back to these issues. Efficacy requirements in certain disease conditions can be very challenging. we've been challenged, for example, on heartworm disease to try and as there's been resistance to various new, some of the different parasites, it becomes more difficult to demonstrate efficacy over a period of time. So it's kind of evolution of some of the disease conditions over time poses challenges on proving efficacy.
Gotcha. Well, I appreciate your testimony very much. And Mr. Chairman, I'll yield back.
Chair, thanks the gentleman. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Georgia. 5 minutes for your questions, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Dr. Solomon, for being here. Appreciate that very much. Let me ask you something. It's my understanding in a new animal drug application that the drug sponsors are responsible for submitting information, and it is quite detailed and quite thorough. From what I understand, in the application, it's got to include information on the drug's chemistry, the composition, the component ingredients, manufacturing methods, facilities and controls, proposed labeling, on and on and on. And not only that, but also if the drug product's intended for use in a food-producing animal, that it also has to be proven for human use, and all this burden falls on the drug sponsors, and it just appears that it's more than even what that the guidelines for animal drug are more stringent than they are for human drug applications, and I'm just interested to know. First of all, do you think that's true? And secondly, if it is, why is that?
So just to take a step back, with all due respect to my human colleagues on review, they have one species to deal with. Often we have to deal with multiple species. So many of the applications, they don't want to market in multiple species at the same time. And that's a challenge because there's different pharmacology versus pharmacokinetics in different species out there. We also have the responsibility in food-producing animals to make sure that this is going to be safe for humans. So once again, I think our safety and efficacy and environmental reviews are very similar to the human side, but when it comes to either multiple species or the human food safety issues, they're unique to the animal side, but that's part of our responsibility to the American public to make sure that the food is safe.
Fair enough. Good answer. Thank you. I want to talk to you about animal drug compounding. This is certainly something that the FDA has, or drug compounding period is something the FDA has been involved in here recently, and rightfully so. But when it comes to animal drug compounding, it's my understanding that it's legal only in very specific circumstances, according to the FDA. And as a result of the Drug Quality Security Act, there were some changes that were made, and from what I understand, the FDA rescinded their initial guidelines, and that they are now looking at and coming up with new guidelines. Are you familiar with that, and what kind of timeline are we looking at here?
So we did have a guidance on compounding. As you're very well aware, it's a challenging issue to find the right balance. There is some need for compounding out there. We don't want that to either prove a safety issue to animals, and we don't want that to undermine the approval of pioneer or generic drugs. So compounding within a veterinary client-patient relationship is something important because veterinarians need access to that. So our previous guidance, there was confusion about applying the DQSA, the Drug Quality Security Act, which does not apply to the animal side of the house.
Right.
We wanted to clarify that. It was never intended to apply to that.
Thank you.
It also, back to my multiple species issues, the previous guidance only addressed compounding for companion animals. And as I've sort of talked about several times now, we have the challenge of compounding for food-producing animals, companion animals, and minor species. So we decided to rescind that compounding guidance. We're working on it. We expect over the next several months to be able to issue a new compounding guidance where it would be, once again, cover the whole spectrum of the species, be clear about not applying the DQSA, try and apply that right balance of where compounding's appropriate, and we'd welcome the opportunity once that's out to come and brief Congress.
Okay, are you soliciting the input of the animal drug compounders while you're formulating this?
We're talking to lots of stakeholders, and once again, this will be another proposal. So we welcome the opportunity when this comes out for a proposal to continue to engage with folks.
Well, thank you for mentioning accessibility because that's extremely important. I can tell you as a practicing pharmacist for over 30 years before I became a member of Congress, this was something we typically worked with our veterinarians and you know, it was very detailed. So the accessibility part of it is very important as well. Good. Thank you very much, and I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields back. Chair thanks the gentleman. I believe that concludes questions from members for your panel, Dr. Solomon. We do, again, want to thank you for being with us and providing your expert testimony today. And certainly as we work through this, we will take what you have shared with us today to heart. And we're going to have the briefest of transitions to our second panel. Dr. Solomon, you're excused, and we'll ask our second panel to take their places.
Thank you very much.
So I want to thank our second panel of witnesses, and I want to thank you for being here today, taking time to testify before the subcommittee. We're going to give each of you an opportunity to give an opening statement, and that will be followed by questions from members. So today we are going to hear on our second panel, we're going to hear from Dr. Rachel Cumberbatch, the Director of Regulatory Affairs, Animal Drugs at the Animal Health Institute, Mr. Bill Zollers, Chairman of the Generic Animal Drug Alliance, and Dr. Michael Topper, President of the American Veterinary Medical Association. We appreciate each of you being here with us today. Dr. Cumberbatch, you're now recognized for 5 minutes to summarize your opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am a veterinarian here today on behalf of the Animal Health Institute, a trade association that represents companies that make medicines for animals. I'm here to ask Congress to reauthorize the Animal Drug User Fee Program, also known as ADUFA, and to provide a pathway for sponsors to meet unmet medical needs by enhancing opportunities for innovation. The animal health industry makes important contributions to the American economy. Fueled by $9.9 billion in sales of medicine, the U.S. animal health industry employs over 21,000 workers and generates more than $1.2 billion in wages. It accounts for $1.2 billion in taxes and maintains a positive trade balance. Furthermore, animal health products directly contribute to the economy of other industries, including veterinary services, animal production, meat and dairy production, and pet services. Combined, these four industries generated $548 billion in output, created more than 1.4 million jobs, and paid over $52 billion in wages in 2016 alone. These contributions extend to every state and every congressional district where people own pets and families rely on the availability of safe food. The Animal Health Institute strongly supports the ADUFA program. This new agreement builds on the success of this program. Funding will increase from $118 million in ADUFA 3 to a total of $150 million in this 5-year agreement. This includes a one-time influx of funds that will be devoted to information technology so that CVM can transition to electronic filing of new animal drug submissions and can eliminate all paper submissions. Current inflation and workload adjustment factors remain as they are, while AHI has agreed to allow FDA to reinvest surplus funds into the program. Existing Sentinel timeframes will remain the same or be slightly reduced, and all current review process changes from the previous ADUFA agreement will remain in place. There is one important piece of business from ADUFA 3, which we are asking Congress to help us complete. ADUFA 3 contained a provision that FDA and AHI would enter into discussions on how to more broadly extend the conditional approval process. Conditional approval is currently available only for minor uses and minor species products. These efforts aim to find a way to expand a pathway to major species applications. Those discussions took place and were productive, bringing each side to near agreement on an approach. However, when we got to the ADUFA 4, CVM was precluded from discussing this issue as part of the agreement. More than a year ago, this committee commendably came together and approved the 21st Century Cures Act to spur innovation in human therapies. By all indications, it is working, and now we ask that you include in this legislation a measure to similarly spur innovation in animal health. Conditional approval for animal health products exists at the EPA, as well as the U.S. Department of Agriculture. And as we said, it also exists for minor use, minor species at the FDA. Expanding the current authority to major species would drive innovation, and most importantly, it would lead to the approval of new products for serious diseases which there are no available treatments, in which it is difficult for clinical effectiveness to be proven via control studies. Thank you for holding this hearing on this important piece of legislation, and thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today about how keeping animals and humans safe using medicines also helps with public health. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Dr. Zollers, you're recognized for 5 minutes for a summary of your opening statement, please.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Bill Zollers, and I serve as the chairman of the Generic Animal Drug Alliance, also known as GADA. We are an independent professional trade organization that represents the interests of the generic animal drug industry. We represent sponsors, manufacturers, distributors, suppliers, and service providers of generic animal drugs. Our products and processes are regulated by the FDA Center for Veterinary Medicine. Our members are focused on the development, regulatory approval, and marketing of high-quality generic drugs for livestock and pets. I would like to thank the committee for inviting me to testify today on behalf of GADA in support of the reauthorization of the Animal Generic Drug User Fee Act. The GADA has previously provided testimony to this subcommittee in support of AGDUFA 1 in 2008 and AGDUFA 2 in 2013. Just like with human generic drugs, generic animal drugs provide cost-effective alternatives to pioneer drugs. Lower-cost generic animal drug options help contribute to the safety of the nation's food supply, the treatment of diseases in animals, and the ability of owners to provide care to their pet family members. However, the potential cost savings from generic animal drugs cannot be achieved without broad availability. It is critical that the CVM regulatory review and approval process for generic drugs is both efficient and predictable. Prior to the implementation of AGDUFA 1, a CVM review cycle of a generic application could take as long as 2 years. In most cases, multiple review cycles are needed, so if an application required 3 review cycles, it could easily take more than 6 to 8 years to receive approval. In the time it took to get an application approved, the market for a generic drug could change, making it no longer cost-effective. This created a disincentive for companies to pursue generic animal drug approvals and denied the public cost-effective generic drugs. The industry remembers this time in our history. No one involved in the approval process for generic drugs wants to see these conditions return. Therefore, the industry is stepping up again to support reauthorization of AGDUFA. Since AGDUFA began, CVM has reduced the review time of an application to a more predictable 270 days. We believe the shorter review times are helping contribute to the growth of our industry. As part of the current reauthorization of AGDUFA 3, the industry has agreed to significantly increase our financial contributions so that generic submissions could receive even shorter review periods that are equivalent to pioneer drug submissions. As currently written, AGDUFA 3 will further shorten some critical submission review times from 270 days to 180 days. The industry is comprised of many small companies and product markets that are much smaller than those for human generic drugs. Therefore, it remains vital that congressional appropriations continue to be provided to the Center for Veterinary Medicine to significantly support the review of generic drug applications. Appropriations must continue at an increased level that enables CVM to meet its public health mission and the important public policy goal of providing generic drug options for farmers and pet owners. We believe AGDUFA 3 provides the review time targets that industry requires to counterbalance the financial investment being made in support of CVM's needed resources to build capacity and balance the realities of a small but growing generics industry. The proposed AGDUFA 3 enhancement concerning e-submissions should make the approval process more efficient. Also, the proposed revisions to the overcollections and offset provisions will more immediately reduce the financial burden if overpayments are made by the industry. Overall, we are hopeful that the reduction in review times will lead to a shortened time from project initiation to approval, allowing generic products to come to market sooner. In conclusion, the GADA supports the proposed legislation for reauthorization of AGDUFA. Thank you.
Chair, thanks, gentlemen. Dr. Topper, you're recognized for 5 minutes for a summary of your opening statement, please.
Thank you and good morning. Like was stated, I am Dr. Mike Topper. I have the privilege of being the president of the American Veterinary Medical Association. And on behalf of the AVMA, I appreciate the opportunity to discuss the importance of reauthorizing the Animal Drug User Fee Act and the Animal Generic Drug User Fee Act. The AVMA was founded in 1863, and we represent over 91,000 individual member veterinarians engaged in the many segments of professional veterinary medicine, including private practice, public health, biomedical research, and many others. The FDA Center for Veterinary Medicine's collection and effective utilization of user fees are important to veterinarians. By providing new animal drugs with a predictable pathway to market, these fees help provide veterinarians with access to new and additional tools that can potentially improve treatment outcomes, provide alternatives to existing therapies, fill unmet medical needs in veterinary medicine, and ultimately improve patient care, which is the center of veterinary practice. The AVMA supports user fees for new animal drug applications when the fees are supplemental to appropriations and directed toward expediting the review process for new animal drug products. There simply are not enough approved drugs for use in animals. Comparisons of FDA data show there are 23 times the number of approved labeled indications for human use as there are for animal use. And when comparing animal drug products approved for minor use and minor species to its human model, which is the Orphan Drug Program, that number increases to 26 times. Thankfully, through the Animal Medicinal Drug Use Clarification Act of 1994 and its extra label drug use provision, veterinarians are provided with greater treatment options. Of course, there are necessary and appropriate restrictions of extra label drug use in food-producing animals. In instances where extra label drug use is allowed in food and companion animals, it is a vital tool that allows veterinarians to use animal and human medications, label for certain indications for other clinical instances in which that therapy may be effective, but for which it is not labeled. Our veterinary medical education, clinical training, and understanding of the pharmaceutical products we use enable us to navigate these uncertain waters, but driving innovation and increasing the number of improved medications will ultimately lead to better patient care, especially in instances where extra label drug use is prohibited. Some diseases and conditions lack treatment options due to the extended course of the disease or the difficult nature of study. Examples in which human drugs are used in an extra label manner in animals include treatments for heart disease, pain management, gastrointestinal disorders, diabetes, immune-mediated diseases, and cancer. While university studies, data collected in foreign countries, anecdotal evidence, and other alternative information all assist in selecting appropriate extra-label therapies, the knowledge that a drug used for therapy has been fully evaluated by the FDA and shown to be safe and effective is invaluable. We've also been encouraged by recent attention given to the topic of expanding conditional approval beyond minor use and minor species. Extending its applicability to major uses and major species would increase the tools in a veterinarian's pharmaceutical toolbox. A greater number of approved animal drugs helps to ensure that veterinary patients receive the best care, and this is the goal of clinical veterinarians across the country. So thank you for the opportunity to speak on this important topic today. We appreciate the attention the subcommittee is giving to this issue and the commitment to addressing the unmet needs in veterinary medicine. Timely passage of this legislation is needed to continue programs that increase the availability of pharmaceutical resources in the treatment of animal diseases. We look forward to working to increase the number of approved animal drugs for the benefit of our patients, their owners, and our communities. Thank you again, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Dr. Topper, and I want to thank each of you for your testimony, and we'll move into the second round of questions from members. Let me begin by recognizing myself for 5 minutes, and let me just ask in a very general sense, and I'll ask it to each of you, how the adoption of the user fees, going back to their initiation, how has it fundamentally changed the industry? So I realize that's pretty broad, and you've already addressed that to some degree, but give me the sound bite. And Dr. Cumberbatch, we'll start with you, and then we'll come down the line.
Thank you very much for the question. The user fee programs has helped with consistency. Sponsors now know when they will hear back from FDA. Also, as Dr. Solomon mentioned, it has allowed them to hire and to increase the number of reviewers, which has been very important for helping them meet the goals of the timelines. Thank you.
Yes, Dr. Zollers?
Yes, as Dr. Solomon indicated, on the generic side of things, we've seen a tremendous increase in workload on the CVM side, and I think that in itself talks to the success of the user fee program. 10 years ago, when we had 2-year review cycles, and we had 12 or 14 members of GADA at that time, and now today we have 270-day review cycles, an increased workload, and over 30 members of GADA. So that is all indicative of the growth of our industry.
Dr. Topper?
Yes, sir. I agree with my colleagues that it has really helped in bringing new animal drugs to the market faster, and we need to continue with this because that's what our patients need.
So now we've been through, I guess this is the 4th iteration for the animal drug user fee and the 3rd for the generic animal drug user fee. How has that evolved over time? Do you think that is something where we've been able to build on the previous levels and increase the availability and timeliness of products? And again, Dr. Cumberbatch, we'll start with you and then come down the line.
Thank you. In ADUFA 1, we began with decreasing the backlog, and now we're moved on to looking at how we can improve efficiency. From here, we will look at how communication can be improved and work towards ADUFA goals, not just during negotiations for this agreement, but all through the five-year agreement, and able to work together to look at how do we best review products and ultimately get additional tools for veterinarians onto the market.
Yes, Dr. Zollers?
Yes, I would agree with a lot of what Rachel just said. Again, for AGDUFA 1, getting through that shock and awe of the two-year review cycle and now getting it down to something manageable. Now we're focused on how do we reduce the time frame from the time we initiate the project till it's actually approved. And we are having very good conversations and good communication with CVM throughout this process, and will continue to, so we can try to improve this process even more before we get to AGDUFA 4 5 years from now.
Sir, Dr. Topper?
And yes, sir, we've been building up all along, and we look forward to this new one building even better, moving things faster. And if we build different things into this, as we heard earlier, it'll just make it better.
And to that end, and we'll start with you this time, Dr. Topper, and move back the other way to the electronic submission. Do you see that as being, ultimately, that's going to be helpful, correct?
Yes, sir. It should speed it up. It should decrease the cost to somebody is providing because it's electronic and they don't have to back up that truckload or send a computer or hard drive in. So it'll be readily available to the reviewers, and they will not have to transcribe it from paper to their own electronic means.
Dr. Zollers?
Yes, we're totally in favor of the electronic system.
And Dr. Cumberbatch?
As Dr. Solomon mentioned, a majority of sponsors of Pioneer's drugs use the electronic submission system already. What we do see is is a need to look at the efficiency. How much data are we putting in? Electronic submissions are very helpful for CVM in getting those to the reviewers. What we're trying to find is a good way for sponsors to be able to get this information in an efficient way.
Well, I want to thank each of you for your testimony today, and Dr. Topper, as in your testimony, you talked about the kind of the differences between humans and animals, and having spent a lifetime in practicing medicine, to think that you've got those both the major and minor classes of animals to consider. You give the anti-inflammatory that you gave to your dog to your cat, and you're in big trouble. I'm sensitive to the problems that you face, and we want you to be able to do your best work. So thank you each for testifying today. Mr. Green, I'll recognize you for 5 minutes for questions, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I hope you didn't have any patience that would bite you.
Well,
That probably does.
how much time do you have?
He was an OBGYN. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Topper, I'm interested in your perspective as a veterinarian on the use of antimicrobials in food-producing animals and the growing public health concerns regarding an antimicrobial resistance. I understand that the use of the medically important antimicrobial drugs in treating food-producing animals is necessary, but I also have concern over the overuse and what steps both the FDA and the animal health providers should be taking to reduce the risks of resistance. Can you explain how these antimicrobial resistance happens and what impact it can have on both the animal and human health?
Well, yes, sir. I can talk to the first part for sure about how the AVMA, along with our colleagues, are very much concerned about antimicrobial resistance, and we are taking as many steps for our members and providing them with information about the judicious use of antimicrobials, as you heard Dr. Solomon talk about, and we have just developed a stewardship for our members to follow in looking at these. So we have been taking an active role in working with the Centers for Veterinary Medicine for the Veterinary Feed Directive, so that all antimicrobials that are put in food have to be under the direction of a veterinarian client-patient relationship, and they have to have that feed directive. Most of the other veterinarians, we know through their judicious use of the antimicrobials, they are working to reduce the number that are being used, and so we support that. To talk about how antimicrobial resistance happens would probably be a lot longer than we would have here, and so we can probably provide you with plenty of literature as to how that antimicrobial resistance occurs, but I'm not ready to talk about it at this time, if that's okay.
How has greater data collection improved veterinarian awareness regarding the overuse of the antimicrobial drugs, and what additional steps should the FDA be taking to address the concerns?
Well, the FDA is monitoring. We do the disease, we do the residue, like Dr. Solomon talked about during the formulation and the approval process of the drug. They have to be able to detect it in the meat products, and so as they approve those methods, that will help detect the antimicrobial uses as they go forward.
Okay. Do you know what the American Veterinary Medical Association is doing to educate its members on the importance of addressing these antimicrobial resistance, and how can veterinarians be good stewards of antimicrobial when treating food-producing animals?
Yes, sir. Like I said, we do have, and along with our industry partners, such as the bovine practitioners, the swine veterinarians, and the avian pathologists, have developed therapeutic guidelines for the judicious use of antibiotics. And we have just approved in our AVMA's House of Delegates our stewardship policy and the core principles of antibiotic use. So we are very much educating our members, and they do understand that there is this great need in public health.
Okay. Well, part of our other jurisdiction on this committee is the need to do medical research in looking at the next vaccinations, the next treatment, because we do have a growing resistance of both in humans, and I was going to see if that happens with animals, that you use these antimicrobials, and then they, over a period of time, they develop a resistance to them. Does that happen in animals
Yes,
as
sir, it does
well as we
happen
see
in
in
animals
humans?
also. Again, as we talked about, different species react to different antibiotics in different ways. So it is a problem in animals also.
Okay. And the concern about growing antimicrobial resistance is a real one, and further compounded by the need for the development of new antibiotics, and will still be effective in the face of the resistance. And I hope we can continue to work closely with the CVM and the CDER to ensure that safe and effective antibiotics are available when needed. So,
Yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman, I'll yield back my time.
Chair, thanks, the gentleman. Gentleman yields back. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Oklahoma. 5 minutes for your questions, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank the panel for the great work and the time and dedication you have spent to bring us to this point. Working with the agency and industry, I know is no easy task, but that's how we, as you can see, that's the best way and the easiest way for us to move forward with any type of legislation. So thank you both, or everybody, for being here. Dr. Cumberbatch, I want to ask you a question. Can you explain the difference between the animal market and the human drug market and elaborate on some of the differences and the challenges that we face?
Absolutely, thank you. You know, as Dr. Solomon said, size is one of the differences in the animal market and the human market. Also, as a veterinarian, when I talk about a treatment protocol, price has to be one of the topics that we talk about,
Right.
and what the availability is of the medication, and what my expectation is as a veterinarian that this is going to work for your particular situation. And it is important to have very good data so that I can share that with an animal owner. And that is why it's important to have new, innovative, well-studied drugs on the market for veterinarians to use.
Well, so what do you think are some of the unmet needs that are in the animal market that we need to try to address?
We've had the opportunity to hear about a number, but osteoarthritis is one that I know we see every day. I hear stories where the cat's hiding under the bed, or my dog doesn't want to play ball anymore. He seems more tired, or my horse won't jump. You know, these seems like changes in behavior, but that's sometimes pain. And osteoarthritis can happen over a period of time, and it's difficult to study because it does take that time. In cattle, we have chronic diseases as well, like Johne's disease, that eventually is fatal. And most importantly, it decreases production and can spread throughout a herd. And that's devastating to us small farmers.
Well, as a cattle owner, which, you know, I don't think we could quite make a living off our cattle, because I still think the fastest way to become a millionaire is running cattle is start with 2 million and you'll get to $1 million. But I'm glad I have other things that can help offset the ranch. But it's still a way of life. It's the way I was raised. It's the way we raise our kids. You know, the biggest traffic jam coming out of our house is usually the cattle that want to, for some reason, hang around the driveway and use the bathroom on it, but that's a whole nother thing. But there is issues that we run about. My colleague from Texas was talking about the antibiotics and the overuse of it, but there has to be a common area that's reached here, because I can tell you personally in our experience, and I'm surrounded by other cattle owners, when we took away the ability to actually buy medicated feed, it actually cost the consumers more, and in my opinion can be even more devastating moving forward, because unlike children, you're not out there watching your cattle necessarily every day on a one-on-one basis. And when you buy cattle out of a stockyard or a sell barn, you buy a trailer full of them. Before you mix them into your herd, you want to be able to make sure that they're not carrying something that is going to infect the herd. We've seen an increase, especially in my area this year, because we have such high swings with temperatures from low to high with pneumonia coming in. And used to, when we would bring our cattle back from the barns, which is very common for them to develop a cough, as you guys are aware of, or a runny nose, we could catch a lot of that before we turn them out into the pastures, because we would feed them some medicated feed. Now we're running into a situation where we have a choice. Instead of sending them just medicated feed, which we're not going to overuse because it's too expensive to use all the time, we have to vaccinate them to be preemptive on this by having to give them a shot that they may not need, or we take the chance of infecting the entire herd. So which one's which as us, which one do we decide to do? It's very expensive to sit there and time consuming to give everybody a shot when you're buying them in pot bellies, which pot bellies, by the way, for us are the big trailers, and you're dumping them to the lot. So when we're having this conversation about over medicating, I understand the concerns. Now, we eat meat too, but there has to be some common area to work with. And so while we've been working with the panel, make sure you're not leaving out the stakeholders like myself or other cattle producers or the stockyards, because I know you've been hearing from the stockyards on this too. So I want to work moving forward with this, but I don't know that what we've done right now is the right approach. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair thanks the gentleman. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Oregon, Dr. Schrader. 5 minutes for your questions, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'll kind of jump on Mark Wayne's discussion a little bit, because I think there's a lot of misinformation out there over the use of antimicrobials and their contribution to human resistance to drugs. There certainly could be a factor. I've spent a lot of time reading a lot of the studies that have been generated since the 70s, and there's lots of inference, but no study that I've seen there's any direct causation. That doesn't mean we shouldn't be judicious or smart about how we use antimicrobials in veterinary medicine or on the ranch. I think every one of us wants to do the right thing, and I would applaud the CVM's recent suggestions that, that in certain situations when there's the right climactic conditions or whatever, that under proper veterinary supervision, that certain therapeutic uses of antimicrobials could be used on a mass basis to prevent more disease and, frankly, suffering to these animals that Mark Wayne and others raise on our farms and ranches. So I just want us to be cognizant of that. And there, I tell you this, in my veterinary practice, there were times when if I did not use an antimicrobial at the appropriate time, that the disease spread would have been much bigger, and there was also a chance for virulence to increase in these animals or these bugs, if you will, to mutate and grow stronger yet. And to my good colleague from Texas, the real world of resistance it's called biology. You know, if you ever watch Jurassic Park, might have been a fun movie, but one thing that is absolutely true there is the real world plants and animals mutate over time. That can be for good things, and it can also be for bad things. So whether or not we get engaged at all in trying to prevent that, the things are still going to change. We should do our best to fight resistance in the ways we can, but it's going to happen anyway, and that's why drug innovation, the whole hearing we're having here today for our animal friends, speed these things to marketplace, because we're going to need ever newer and smarter ways to treat these animals, whether it's on an anti-inflammatory or antimicrobial side. So ending my soliloquy here, Dr. Topper, do you see expanding conditional approval as negatively affecting FDA safety and efficacy standards in any way?
No, sir, because like Dr. Solomon said, they will be doing this all along, and it will just get some of these drugs that are right now maybe out on extra label drug use, but we still have that great unmet medical need, and this will help very much if this is added to the bill.
I would agree. Talking about extra label use, a little different than conditional use. How do the two processes work in synergy, or how are they different?
I will do my best to my knowledge of them. The extra label drug use, again, are approved drugs that are already on the market. They have met FDA efficacy. They may be for humans, or they may be for another animal species. So hopefully they were safe in that species. This conditional would be specific for the species intended for use, so it would then have the same safety studies done for that species, and the efficacy would be increased upon as time goes along. So the difference would be that it would be, in my knowledge, that it would be for the species intended for use and not just using it, something approved for a different
species. To your earlier comments, it's just another tool in the toolbox for enabling veterinarians who, again, the market, real world marketplace, costs matter, as Dr. Zoller say, can't take advantage of all these great new drugs necessarily that are coming out. I think it was the chairman and others indicate, or you had indicated earlier, 23 human products for every veterinary product that's developed out there. So this is just a great way, a safe way, an efficacious way for veterinarians to have access, hopefully, to some of the same opportunities that we do in the human field. And I'd argue that our food safety is critical to human safety, the whole public health aspect that Dr. Cumberbatch talked about. Dr. Cumberbatch, if I could come to you, again, we talked earlier about very few conditional approvals have even been requested, much less granted at this time. From your standpoint, maybe Dr. Zollers, if you have an opinion on this, what are the barriers? Is it just familiarity with this new process, or are there some barriers given some of these companies are pretty small?
Thank you, Dr. Schrader. Right now, conditional approval is for minor use, minor species. And by definition, that is a very small market. And so by expanding this, it would allow companies to bring forward products to a bigger market for that unmet need. And in no way would this be taking away or preventing companies from coming forward and still utilizing MUMS as it currently is.
All right. Dr. Zollers, if I may, real quick.
Yeah, I would just say right now, small companies, it comes down to how much money can they make and revenue can they make with this process. And a lot of times these just don't pan out.
Roger that. Thank you. And I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Chair, thanks, gentleman. Gentleman yields back. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Georgia. 5 minutes for your questions, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank all of y'all for being here. Dr. Cumberbatch, I'll start with you. Earlier, when Dr. Solomon was here, I'd asked him about the process by which the new animal drug application process and how thorough it was and how much information that the drug manufacturers had to submit along with a new animal drug application. I just wanted to ask you, from your perspective, do you think that's an impediment for new animal drug breakthroughs in any way, that it's so detailed and so, for lack of a better word, so laborious?
Bringing a new product to market takes time. It takes investment. In fact, we have a survey that shows that it can take up to 10 years and $100 million to bring a product to market. Now, as we were talking about with Congressman Mullen as well, at the end of the day, it comes down to what can an animal owner pay for this? These products need to be at a reasonable price point as well. And so, yes, having a long review, an expensive review, ultimately can hinder our ability to get new products onto the market.
So you do believe that perhaps just a different level of data might be sufficient and still provide the protection that we need? And because there is a balancing act, we all know there. And quite honestly, from my perspective, FDA a lot of times has, and not just FDA, but all federal agencies have the tendency to overreact sometimes and over-require. So is it your feeling that it could be done safely with less information?
We are committed to working with FDA to look at those efficiencies while making sure that we maintain safety and quality in the products.
Mr. Chairman, we don't have any kind of abbreviated, like we do with the drug approvals. We don't have any kind of abbreviated application in this area, do we?
In the generic space, you certainly do.
In the generic space for animal control?
Correct.
Yeah,
Yes.
we do. Okay. But not for the new drugs, and obviously that wouldn't work as well. Let me ask you, Dr. Cumberbatch, I'll start with you. From what I understand, the electronic submission, that the applications are going to have to be submitted electronically starting in October of 2018. You think y'all going to be prepared for that? Are you ready for that? Is that sufficient time?
The pioneer companies have been utilizing the e-submitter, and so I am confident, yes, AHI members will be ready for that transition.
Any recommendations in that process that thus far, are you having input into that process?
The communication is key. Developing the templates that they use for the e-submission, the time that it would take for a sponsor to put the data in that they collect is important. It adds to that time and that administrative burden. And so increased communication, working together on what those templates look like. They have also hoped to provide webinars and training. These are all very important.
Great. Dr. Topper, just very quickly, I wanted to ask you, you know, one of the concerns and certainly one of the experiences I had as a practicing pharmacist was the price of some of these medications, particularly for the companion animals. And, you know, unlike human patients where you would have insurance and have a copay, you know, there is no insurance or copay for these animals and for these types of drugs particularly. Is there anything that you can really recommend that manufacturers might be able to do to lower the cost of some of these medications, besides take a cut in profit?
Well, you raise a very difficult issue, and it's a complex issue. To ensure that the drugs are safe and efficacious, then they have to go through this process. So anything we can do to speed up the process and make it more efficient, hopefully will result in drug lowering cost, and especially as the drugs move to generic types, and that should lower the cost also. But it's a complicated, as we know, even in human medicine.
Great. Well, thank all of you for being here. It's been a very interesting hearing today. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair thanks the gentleman. Seeing no additional members wishing to ask questions. Mr. Green, did you have anything on redirect?
No, Mr. Chairman. I think the job's been done, but I do have some concern because our next hat will be trying to find, you know, some of the solutions for the drug resistance we have. But appreciate the efforts.
Very well. Again, seeing no further members wishing to ask questions, I want to thank our witnesses for being here today. I would like to submit statements from the following for the record. The Agriculture Value Chain Coalition. Pursuant to committee rules, I remind members they have 10 business days to submit additional questions for the record. I ask that witnesses submit their response within 10 business days upon receipt of those questions. And without objection, the subcommittee is adjourned.